I'm joined for that by France 24's Elena Casas Montañez. Good morning to you, Elena.
Morning,
Now we're going to start off looking at Libya and the relationship between various Western countries and the Gaddafi regime. We've heard about links there with British secret services and the rendition of terror suspect. Is that continuing to make the front pages?
There's a slew of new revelations about that in today's British press, most of them very embarrassing for particularly Tony Blair's British government and the links that they had with Gaddafi at that time. Probably the most explosive is in here in the Telegraph, which is the testimony of Abdel Hakim Belhaj, who is now in charge of the anti-Gaddafi troops in Tripoli, but who says he was detained by the CIA in Thailand in 2004 as a result of a British tip-off. He had apparently applied for asylum in Britain and let the embassy there in Thailand know that he would be going, and he was then dragged off that flight and arrested. So he says that British security services must have tipped the CIA off. He says he was then tortured in detention and interviewed by British intelligence agents whom he told that he had been tortured, and he said not only did they do nothing about that, but they also then arranged for him to be sent to Tripoli and imprisoned there by Gaddafi, where he was also tortured. Now, this is his own testimony, but it is backed up by some letters that were found in the former office of Gaddafi's foreign minister, Moussa Koussa, including one from an MI6 agent who the paper believes is Sir Mark Allen, the former head of counter-terrorism in Britain, which says, "We congratulate you on the arrival of Mr. Belhaj. It was the least we could do for you." Which
it's a highly embarrassing tone if that document
seems to be quite a strong piece of evidence if that document is real, that British intelligence agents did indeed not only get information from people who were tortured under Gaddafi, but actually send them to him.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That could prove very embarrassing for various people in the British establishment. Moving on now, Elena, and plenty of papers starting their commemorative coverage of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Of course, that 10-year anniversary coming up soon on Sunday. You've been looking at a piece in today's Guardian newspaper from the UK on how security companies may have profited from the fear of terrorism.
Yes, of course, there's tons of stories around the anniversary, as you might imagine, but there is a piece in The Guardian which is particularly interesting, strongly titled How Firms Cashed In on the Climate of Fear, and it looks at the growth of what they call the national security industrial complex around 9/11 and the private contractors taking over the roles of American soldiers in war and of American spies on the domestic front. Now, the most famous cases of this were, of course, the security companies that operated in Iraq, famously like Blackwater, which was forced to change its name after a checkered human rights record. But they say that's by far not the full extent of the amount that the war on terror has been privatised by the US. They say there's 250,000 Americans who have top-secret national security clearance, and private firms working in this area have more office space than 10 Pentagons in Washington, D.C.
Which itself is huge. So
it really is.
Sounds like very big business there.
Yes, the paper also talks to psychologists about how different companies exploited the fear felt by Americans to sell them different products, including cars, after people became afraid of air travel, and look at some of the rather stranger consequences, like apparently the fact that 1,600 Americans died in car accidents in late 2001, making journeys they would otherwise have been made by plane.
Absolutely fascinating stuff there. Now, on to the economic crisis, no avoiding it. That made headlines in the French press today. What about the rest of the European papers?
Let's take a quick look at Italy's La Repubblica. Of course, they're going out on general strike today, but the editorial in the paper says there's just no point because it seems that Berlusconi's government is determined not to listen to what goes on in the street and indeed to pass measures completely ignoring what the unions there are doing, and they say there's just no one in charge of the good ship Italy and it's heading for a wreck. In the editorial there.
Okay, so not mincing their words there.
Not at all.
Finally, briefly to Mexico, where tweeting can apparently land you in jail.
Yes, this is a story in the paper La Jornada, which is made a lot of noise around Latin America. It's two people in Veracruz in Mexico who have been jailed for a terrorist act, which was telling people that there were kidnappers stealing children from schools in Veracruz. Now, that's obviously a little bit irresponsible, and it did cause panic in a city where there is already an epidemic of kidnapping. But the paper says they were just trying to warn people, and the local government there is putting itself on the same level as Gaddafi when it jails people for what they say on Twitter.
Okay, very interesting development there, a new technology and the war on drugs. Thanks very much indeed, Elena Casas Montañez, for that international press review. Stay tuned here to France 24. Coming up next after a very short break, the latest business news, including the very latest figures from the markets.